Harborlight Evenings. The first thing Mara noticed every single time she came back along the coast road was the way the lighthouse seemed to hold the horizon in place. It stood on a low headland where the grass grew thick and springy, where wind had learned the patient shapes of the stones, and where the sea was always there, not loud or threatening, simply present, like a steady neighbor who never forgot your name. The tower was not tall in a proud way, not trying to compete with the sky, but it had a calm confidence that made it feel taller than it was. Whitewashed walls, a band of weathered red near the top, and windows that caught the late light and returned it in softened squares. Even in the middle of the day, when the lantern was unlit, the lighthouse looked awake. Mara's small car rolled slowly over the last rise, and she let her foot ease off the pedal, as if the land itself asked for quiet here. The road narrowed, the hedges thinned, and then there it was, the tower and the keeper's cottage beside it, a handful of outbuildings tucked into the lee of the slope, and beyond them the sea opening wide as a held breath. She could see a strip of beach far below, pale stones and dark seaweed lines, and a gull turning on the wind with lazy certainty. The air felt different too, saltier, cooler, with the faint, clean bite of sea spray that made her lungs feel newly rinsed. She pulled into the gravel turnout near the cottage, where the stones had been packed down by years of tires and boots and small deliveries. The engine clicked itself quiet. For a moment she stayed where she was, hands still on the wheel, and listened. The wind made a soft brushing in the grass. Somewhere, a loose shutter tapped gently, not frantic, more like a finger drumming while thinking. Farther off, waves pressed and released against rock in a rhythm that sounded like someone folding heavy cloth again and again. When she opened the door, the air stepped in around her at once, cool on her cheeks, lifting a strand of hair and then letting it fall. She got out and stretched, not in any dramatic way, just the small, honest stretch of someone who had been sitting too long. The lighthouse and cottage seemed to watch her without hurry, as if they had been expecting her at any time and could wait as long as needed. A cat appeared from beneath the bench by the cottage door, sleek and gray with a white patch like a small bib. It moved with the unbothered grace of a resident who knew all schedules were flexible. It paused halfway across the path, blinked at Mara, and then continued toward her as if it had always intended to say hello. "Hello, Juniper," Mara said, because she had been told the cat's name on her first visit, and because it felt right to greet what belonged here. Juniper rubbed against her ankle, the fur cool from the air, and then sat and looked up, whiskers forward, waiting for whatever came next. Mara crouched and scratched behind the cat's ears, and Juniper's eyes narrowed to pleasant slits. The cat leaned in with the polite insistence of someone accepting a small kindness as their due. Mara stood again and looked toward the cottage. Smoke, thin and pale, curled from the chimney, and she could smell it, a gentle wood smoke smell that reminded her of winter evenings, even though it was not winter now. The door opened before she reached it, as if the person inside had seen her through the window and timed it perfectly. Elias Harper stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. He was not old, not young, somewhere in the middle where a person feels settled into themselves, and his face had the weathered softness of someone who spent time outdoors without rushing through it. His hair was slightly tousled, and he wore a faded sweater that looked like it had learned the shape of his shoulders. His smile arrived easily, warm and uncomplicated. "You made it," he said, as if Mara had been arriving for years. "I did," Mara replied, and she felt the last bit of city noise drain from her mind just from saying it. The road was clear. "That's good. Come in when you're ready. Kettle's on." He stepped aside, holding the door open, and Juniper slipped past him first, tail upright like a small flag. Mara followed, bringing in her bag and the faint scent of the coast. The cottage interior was simple in a way that felt thoughtful rather than bare. A small entry table held a bowl for keys, a stack of letters, and a smooth stone that looked like it had been picked up from the beach and brought in as a reminder. Boots lined the wall in a neat row, and a pegboard held a raincoat, a wool hat, and a pair of work gloves. The living room opened to her left, a sofa with a woven throw, a bookshelf with worn spines and a few small objects, a seashell, a brass compass, a tiny model ship, a window seat where the cushion was slightly indented, as if someone often sat there. In the fireplace, a small fire had been laid, flames not roaring, just quietly doing their work. The crackle was soft, like someone turning pages. Elias moved toward the kitchen, and Mara followed the sound of water heating and the faint clink of cups. The kitchen smelled of tea and something baked, perhaps bread or scones, and the warmth there wrapped around her hands. Elias took down 2 mugs, one blue, one cream-colored, and set them on the counter with care. "I made lemon biscuits," he said, nodding toward a plate covered with a cloth. They turned out a little softer than usual, but in a good way. "Soft sounds perfect," Mara said. She set her bag down by the chair and leaned her palms on the edge of the counter, watching the steam rise from the kettle spout. Elias poured the water over tea leaves in a small pot, then set a timer, old-fashioned, that ticked gently. He moved as if he had learned to do everything without excess. Nothing clattered. Nothing was hurried. Even the spoon he used to stir made only a quiet whisper against the ceramic. Mara's eyes drifted to the window above the sink. Through it, she could see the lighthouse tower rising behind the cottage, its white surface catching the afternoon light. A gull passed by, close enough that she could see its wingtip feathers spread like a hand, and then it was gone. "So," Elias said, leaning against the counter opposite her, "how was the week?" Mara let out a breath that felt like she had been holding it since Monday. "Busy," she admitted. "Not terrible, just lots of small things. Meetings, emails, a printer that decided it would rather be a sculpture than a printer." Elias's smile widened. "Printers have a strong sense of personality." "They do," Mara agreed. "And I forgot how long it takes for my mind to stop making lists. Even on the drive here, I was thinking about what I forgot to do." "It takes a little time," Elias said kindly, not as advice, just as a fact he had observed. "This place has its own pace. It's patient." The timer chimed softly, a small, bright sound. Elias poured the tea into the mugs and set one in front of her. The tea was amber, and the steam carried a scent that was both familiar and fresh, like a garden after rain. He lifted the cloth from the plate of biscuits, and the smell of lemon and butter rose gently. The biscuits were golden at the edges, pale in the middle, and looked like they would yield easily to a bite. Elias offered the plate, and Mara took one, feeling its warmth through her fingers. She took a bite, and it was exactly what he had promised, soft and bright with lemon not too sweet, the crumb tender. It made her smile without thinking. "Perfect," she said, and meant it. Elias seemed pleased in the quiet way of someone who enjoyed making things for others without needing fuss about it. He took a biscuit for himself, sat at the small table by the window, and motioned for her to sit across from him. Mara did, wrapping her hands around her mug. For a while they simply drank tea and watched the light change outside. A cloud moved over the sun, and the room shifted to a softer shade. The fire continued its gentle conversation with the logs. Juniper jumped onto the window seat and curled into a neat circle, the tip of her tail flicking once and then settling. Mara felt her shoulders loosen, and her thoughts became less sharp-edged. The city, with its constant demand for attention, felt very far away. Here, the biggest sound was the sea, steady and untroubled. "You'll want to see the lantern room," Elias said after a while, as if reading her mind. "The glass is clean today. Good visibility." "I would," Mara said, "if it's all right." "It's always all right," Elias replied. He stood, taking his mug to the sink, and Mara followed suit. She rinsed her cup and set it to dry, feeling a small satisfaction in the simple act. They stepped back outside, and the wind greeted them again, lifting the edges of Elias's sweater and teasing Mara's hair. The grass on the headland moved in waves, a green echo of the sea. Elias walked toward the lighthouse door, a heavy wooden door set into the base of the tower, and took a key from his pocket. Mara had been here once before, just a short visit, to see if she could help with some cataloging work that Elias had mentioned needing. The lighthouse had been maintained by the Coastal Service for years, but recently it had been passed into a local trust, kept operational and cared for as a historical site, and Elias had been appointed caretaker. He lived in the cottage and tended the light, and he also welcomed the occasional visitor, mostly locals and the few travelers who found this quieter stretch of coast. Mara, on her first visit, had offered to help with organizing the old logbooks and documents that had accumulated, because she liked order and because she liked this place. Elias had accepted with gratitude, and then he had made tea and biscuits, and somehow, without either of them naming it, she had started coming back. Now, as he unlocked the door and pushed it open, Mara felt that familiar anticipation, the way a child feels entering a place that holds a secret, even if that secret is simply height and light. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of stone and old paint, and a faint metallic scent from the machinery above. The staircase spiraled upward, narrow and smooth in the center from years of feet. A small window set into the wall let in a shaft of light. As they climbed, the air cooled slightly, and the sounds from outside softened, replaced by the quiet of enclosed space and the gentle echo of steps. Elias climbed with ease, one hand on the railing, the other occasionally touching the wall as if greeting it. Mara followed, breathing in the calm, noticing details, the texture of the stone, the slight curve of each step, the way the light shifted as they turned. They reached a landing where a small door opened into a room with shelves. This was where supplies were stored: cleaning cloths, oil, spare bulbs, a toolbox, coils of rope. Elias paused to adjust a lantern wick and a small emergency lamp, his fingers deft. "Everything gets checked," he said, as if explaining to the lighthouse itself, not because it's likely to fail, but because it's polite. Mara smiled. Polite. He nodded seriously. It's a working thing. It deserves attention. They continued upward. The staircase narrowed slightly as it rose, and the wind could be heard again, faint through the walls. Finally, they reached the door to the lantern room. Elias opened it, and the space beyond was bright. Glass panes all around, each one washed clean so the outside world seemed close enough to touch. Mara stepped in and felt the height at once. The sea stretched out in all directions, textured by wind, catching light in shifting scales. The coastline curved away, dotted with small houses and a cluster of trees. Farther inland, hills rolled gently, softened by distance. The sky was a layered thing of pale blue and thin clouds, and the sun, low now, gave everything a warm edge. In the center of the room stood the lantern apparatus, a large glass and metal structure with lenses that looked like a cut jewel. Even unlit, it held light, catching and bending it. The metal was polished, the glass spotless. Elias moved toward it and ran his hand along the railing around it, checking as he always did. Mara walked to the window and placed her palms on the sill. The glass was cool. She could see the path leading down to the beach, a thin line through grass and rock. She could hear, faintly, the waves. Up here, even the wind sounded different, less like a rush and more like a steady breath. It feels like the world is quieter from here, Mara said, speaking softly as if loudness would disturb the view. It's the same world, Elias replied, his voice equally quiet, but you notice different parts of it. Mara watched a fishing boat far out, a small dark shape moving slowly. Its wake was a thin line behind it, and she imagined the person on it, standing with hands steady on the wheel, looking at the horizon. The thought brought no worry, only a gentle sense of connection. Elias opened a small hatch in the floor and checked the mechanism beneath, then closed it and secured it. He turned to Mara. I thought we could work on the logbooks after this, he said. There's a crate from the old storeroom I brought out. It's mostly papers, but there are some interesting things tucked in there. A few letters, a map or two. Mara's eyes brightened. I'd love that. They stayed in the lantern room a little longer, just long enough for the light to change again. The sun edging lower and casting longer shadows across the sea. Mara watched the way the glass panes reflected the inside of the room, mixing the lighthouse's interior with the world outside, as if reminding her that both belonged together. When they finally descended, their footsteps echoed in the stairwell, a comforting sound like the lighthouse itself was keeping time. Down in the cottage again, the warmth welcomed them. Elias led Mara to a small room off the living room, a kind of study. A desk sat under a window, and shelves were lined with binders and boxes. On the desk were stacks of papers, neatly squared, and a notebook open to a page filled with careful writing. Elias brought in a wooden crate and set it on the table. He lifted the lid, and the smell of old paper rose, not unpleasant, more like a library smell, dry and faintly sweet. These were stored in the lower room for years, he said. They were wrapped in cloth, so they're in decent shape, but they need sorting. Mara sat and pulled on a pair of thin cotton gloves that Elias offered. The gloves were soft, and she flexed her fingers, ready. Elias sat across from her, also gloved, and together they lifted out the first stack of logbooks. Each logbook was bound in thick covers, some leather, some cloth, the edges worn. When Mara opened one, the pages were lined and filled with handwritten entries. The ink had faded in places, but the words were still clear enough. Dates, weather notes, maintenance tasks, names. It was a record of days, ordinary days, made meaningful by attention. "Look at this," Mara said, pointing to an entry from decades ago. "Someone wrote about repairing a hinge in the same door we use today." Elias leaned in. "It's the same hinge," he said, and there was something quietly satisfying about that. "We've replaced parts, but some things last." Mara turned another page, and here, "Fog thick at dawn," sounded the horn twice. Elias nodded. "There used to be a horn. It's gone now, but the entry stays." They worked slowly, not rushing to get through everything, but letting each item have its moment. Mara liked the feel of paper, the weight of history. She liked the way Elias handled each book with respect, turning pages carefully, smoothing corners gently, as if each book were a living thing that preferred not to be startled. Occasionally they paused to read an interesting line aloud, not for performance, just to share it. A note about a visitor bringing fresh bread, a comment about unusually calm seas, a small sketch of a bird in the margin. These details made the past feel close, not distant, like someone had lived here and left a trail of quiet moments for others to find. As the afternoon turned toward evening, the room grew dimmer. Elias lit a lamp, a soft yellow light that made the papers look warmer. The fire in the living room continued, and the smell of it drifted into the study. At one point, Mara found a folded letter tucked between two logbooks. The paper was thin and slightly brittle, and the handwriting on the outside was careful. She looked up at Elias. "This one looks personal." Elias nodded. "Some keepers kept everything. Letters, receipts, notes. We don't have to read it if it feels too private. But sometimes they've been here so long that no one remembers who wrote them. Still, we can handle them gently." Mara unfolded the letter carefully. Inside, the writing was neat and small. It was addressed to a keeper, thanking him for helping a family find their way back to shore on a misty evening and offering a jar of honey in gratitude. The tone was simple, sincere, and it made Mara's chest feel warm in a quiet way. "It's just thanks," Mara said. "And honey." Elias smiled. "Honey feels like the right currency for a lighthouse." Mara refolded the letter and placed it in a labeled folder Elias had prepared. Correspondence. Year unknown. Elias wrote a note on a small slip of paper, marking where it had been found, and tucked it with the letter. Everything had a place, and the care they took made the work feel less like sorting and more like honoring. Juniper wandered into the study at some point, hopped onto Mara's lap without asking, and settled there. The cat's weight was steady, warm. Mara kept working with one hand, her gloved fingers turning pages, while the other hand rested lightly on Juniper's back. The cat purred, a deep, even vibration that matched the sea's rhythm outside. "Juniper approves," Elias said quietly. "She has excellent taste," Mara replied. Elias chuckled softly and returned to a ledger he was examining. His concentration was gentle. He did not furrow his brow dramatically. He simply leaned in, reading carefully, then making a note on a sheet. Mara found herself mirroring his calm. Her movements became measured. Her thoughts stopped rushing. Outside, the sky began to shift into the colors of evening. The light through the window turned amber, then rose, then softened to a pale gray blue. The sea took on a darker shade, and the waves reflected the fading light in thin silver lines. Elias stood and stretched his shoulders. "We should check the lantern soon," he said. "It'll be time." Mara nodded, feeling a small spark of anticipation again. She liked the ritual of it, the way the lighthouse's work shaped the day without forcing anything. The light was not a performance. It was simply a steady offering. They tidied the table, stacking the logbooks and papers neatly, covering the crate with cloth again. Mara removed her gloves, folding them carefully. Juniper slipped off her lap and padded out of the room as if her supervision was complete. Back outside, the air had cooled. The wind was softer now, less playful, more settled. The sky near the horizon held a thin band of gold, while above it deepened toward blue. Elias walked ahead, keys in hand, and Mara followed, her boots crunching gently on gravel. They entered the lighthouse again, and this time the climb felt different. The stairwell held the dimness of evening, and the small windows showed a darker sea. Mara's breath made a faint cloud in the cooler air, and Elias's footsteps sounded steady, like a familiar song. In the lantern room, the world was dusky. The glass panes reflected the interior more clearly now, turning the room into a floating island of metal and glass. Elias moved to the lantern apparatus, opened a panel, and began his checks. He adjusted something with a small tool, then closed it. He moved with practiced ease. Mara stood by the window and watched the horizon. A few lights had appeared far along the coast, tiny points. The sea looked like ink with a sheen. Elias finished his checks and reached for a switch. There was a brief pause, a moment that always felt like holding a breath. Then the lantern came to life. The light began as a glow, then strengthened, and the lens turned it into a focused beam that swept out across the water. Mara watched the beam move, slow and steady, painting the sea in a pale arc. It was a beautiful thing, but not in a dramatic way. It was beautiful like a well-made chair or a warm loaf of bread. Useful, steady, comforting. Elias stood beside her, hands resting on the railing, watching the light's first rotations as if greeting an old friend. "It never feels routine," Mara said softly. Elias nodded. "It's the same action, but not the same moment." The light continued its slow sweep. Mara imagined it traveling over the water, touching waves, reaching boats, passing over the dark line of the horizon. She imagined it being seen by someone far out, someone who would recognize it and feel reassured. Not excited, just calmly certain of where they were. After a few more rotations, Elias checked the instrument panel once more, then closed it. "All set," he said, and his voice held that quiet satisfaction of a task completed well. They stayed a little longer, looking out at the darkening sea, letting the lighthouse's presence settle. Then they descended again, and the warmth of the cottage seemed even more welcoming after the cool air above. Elias made a simple supper, not elaborate, just soup warmed on the stove and bread sliced thick, with butter that softened quickly. Mara offered to help, and Elias accepted in a way that made it feel like shared time rather than assistance. She set the table while he ladled soup into bowls. The soup smelled of herbs and vegetables, and the steam curled upward. The bread crust was crisp, and the inside was soft. Juniper appeared at the right moment, weaving between their feet, then settling near the fire with the air of someone who knew where the warmest spot would be. They ate at the kitchen table with the window dark beside them, reflecting the room's light. Outside, the lighthouse beam moved across the night. Inside, a fire crackled gently. Their conversation was quiet, about small things. Elias told Mara about a boy from the village who had come by earlier to ask questions about the lighthouse lens, his eyes wide with curiosity. Mara told Elias about a co-worker who had brought in a basket of oranges and left them in the break room with a note that simply said, "For anyone who needs a little brightness." "People do small good things," Elias said, and it sounded like a statement of fact, not sentiment. "They do," Mara agreed, and she felt grateful for it. After supper, they washed dishes together. Elias washed, Mara dried, and the rhythm of it was soothing. Water ran, plates clinked softly, a towel brushed against ceramic. There was no need to fill every moment with words. The quiet between them felt comfortable. When the kitchen was tidy again, Elias brought out a small tin of tea and asked Mara if she wanted another cup. She did. They moved to the living room, cups in hand, and sat by the fire. The room glowed with soft light, and the shadows in the corners were gentle, not heavy. Juniper stretched and moved to Mara's lap again, settling with a sigh. Elias reached for a book on the shelf, one with a faded cover. He did not open it yet. He held it in his hands, turning it over as if deciding. "I found something in one of the boxes yesterday," he said. "A small notebook, not official. It looks like someone's personal notes. Not private in a secret way, more like observations, little descriptions of days." Mara looked up, interested. "Can I see?" Elias nodded and rose, stepping into the study. He returned with a thin notebook, its cover worn and stained, the edges soft from handling. He handed it to Mara carefully. Mara opened it. The handwriting inside was different from the logbooks, looser, more intimate. The entries were not dated precisely, but they described weather, the sea, the feeling of wind, the way the light looked through fog. One entry described hearing music from the village carried on the wind. Another described a fisherman leaving a basket of apples on the doorstep as thanks for fixing a gate. Mara read a few lines aloud, not loud, just enough for Elias to hear. The words were simple, but they held attention. The person who wrote them had been someone who noticed. Elias listened, his eyes on the fire. "It's interesting," he said, "how some people keep records for work, and then also keep records for themselves, like they needed both." Mara turned another page. "Here," she said, smiling. "They wrote about Juniper's predecessor, I think. The cat has decided the window seat is hers. I am simply allowed to sit there sometimes." Elias laughed softly. "Some things never change." Mara closed the notebook gently and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it. It was not heavy physically, but it carried the quiet presence of the person who had written it. She imagined them sitting by the same fire, hearing the same waves, watching the same beam sweep the sea. "It makes the place feel layered," Mara said. "Like there are many evenings stacked here." Elias nodded. "Yes, and we get to add ours." They sat in silence for a while then, not awkward, just comfortable. The tea warmed Mara's hands. Juniper's purr matched the crackle of the fire. Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its slow, patient sweep. Later, Elias offered Mara the guest room. She had stayed before, and the room felt familiar now. A simple bed with a quilt, a small dresser, a chair by the window. The window looked out toward the lighthouse, and from it she could see the beam moving across the dark. Mara went upstairs, washed her hands and face in the small bathroom, and changed into comfortable clothes. The cottage was quiet except for the fire downstairs and the occasional gentle movement of the wind against the house. She stood by the window for a moment, watching the beam. It moved without hurry, never missing a rotation, steady as breathing. She thought about the logbooks, the entries describing fog and repairs and bread delivered to the door. She thought about the thank you letter with honey. She thought about the small notebook with observations of days. The lighthouse was not only stone and light, it was a place shaped by care, by people doing small tasks well, by kindness offered in simple forms. When she climbed into bed, the quilt was cool at first, then warmed quickly. She lay on her side, watching the faint sweep of light through the window. Not bright enough to fill the room, just a gentle shift on the glass. Downstairs, Elias moved quietly, finishing his own evening routine. Mara heard, faintly, the sound of a book closing, the soft click of a lamp being turned off. The cottage settled into its night posture, as if drawing a blanket around itself. In the morning, Mara woke to a pale light and the sound of gulls. The air in the room was cool. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and looked out the window. The sea was a softer blue than the night before, and the lighthouse lantern was no longer sweeping the light off now that day had arrived. She dressed and went downstairs. The smell of coffee met her halfway, rich and inviting. Elias was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a mug, and he looked up with a smile. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Mara replied, and she felt the word come out slower than it did in the city, as if it had time to stretch. Juniper sat on the floor, watching them with calm expectation. Elias set a mug in front of Mara and slid a plate toward her with toast and jam. The jam was homemade, dark and glossy, and the toast was warm. "I picked up the jam from Mrs. Lorne in the village," Elias said. "Blackberry. She insists I take a jar every time I pass." Mara spread jam on her toast and took a bite. It tasted like late summer, like sun-warmed berries. "It's wonderful," she said. "She'll be pleased," Elias replied. "She takes pride in it." After breakfast, they went back to the study for a while. The day outside was bright but cool, with a breeze that kept the air fresh. Mara and Elias continued sorting the papers, their movements practiced now, like two people working together who understood each other's rhythm. Mara found an old photograph tucked into a folder. It showed the lighthouse and cottage, but the cottage looked slightly different, and the grass around it was shorter. In the photo, two people stood by the door, one holding a lantern. Their faces were not clear, but their posture suggested familiarity with the place. She showed it to Elias, and he leaned in, studying it. "That might be from the 1950s, he said. "Look at the clothes and the lantern style." Mara traced the edge of the photo with her finger. "They look content." "It's a good word for it," Elias said. They placed the photograph into an archival sleeve, labeled it, and set it aside. Each small discovery felt like finding a seashell on the beach. Not necessary, but quietly delightful. Later, Elias suggested they take a walk down to the beach. Mara agreed readily. They put on coats, and Elias brought a small basket, saying he wanted to collect a few smooth stones for the garden border. Mara liked that idea. Stones with a history, brought up and placed with intention. The path down to the beach wound through grass and between low shrubs. The air grew more salty as they descended. The sound of the sea grew louder, not loud in a harsh way, but fuller, like moving closer to a music source. Mara felt the wind against her cheeks, cool and clean. At the beach, the stones were rounded and varied in color, gray, white, brown, with occasional pieces of green glass softened by the sea. Mara bent to pick up a stone and turned it in her hand. It was smooth, cool, and heavy for its size. Elias moved along the waterline, looking for stones that were flat and uniform. His eye practiced. He placed a few in the basket, then paused to watch the waves. The waves here did not crash violently. They rolled in, lifted, then settled, leaving a thin line of foam that retreated quietly. The sound was steady and soothing, like a repeated phrase. Mara walked along the beach, her boots crunching on stones, and found herself smiling at small things. A piece of driftwood shaped like a hook, a cluster of shells tucked between rocks, a gull standing on one leg with mild disinterest. Elias found a stone and handed it to Mara. "This one is almost heart-shaped," he said. Mara took it and laughed softly. It was, in a rough way, a heart shape, as if the sea had tried to make a symbol and then shrugged. "It's charming," she said. They continued collecting stones, not many, just enough to fill the basket halfway. The act of choosing stones was strangely satisfying. Each one had been shaped by time and water, and now it would be placed in a new role, marking a garden edge. As they walked back up the path, the lighthouse tower came into view again, standing steady against the sky. Mara felt a quiet affection for it, like affection for a familiar lamp in a room. Back at the cottage, Elias washed the stones in a bucket of water, swishing them gently. Mara helped, rubbing sand off surfaces, revealing the stones' true colors. When they were clean, Elias laid them out on a cloth in the sun to dry. "That's another small task done," he said. Mara smiled. "Small tasks add up." "They do," Elias agreed. The day passed in a gentle sequence. They had tea again. They sorted a few more papers. Elias fixed a loose hinge on a cupboard door, and Mara held the door steady. Juniper supervised from a nearby chair, blinking slowly. At one point, a neighbor from the village arrived with a basket of eggs and a loaf of bread, exchanging them for a jar of Elias's pickled onions. The conversation at the door was easy, filled with small updates about weather and the state of the road. Mara watched these exchanges and felt something settle in her. This place was made of such moments, woven together. Not grand events, but steady care and small generosity. As evening approached again, the sky shifted once more. Clouds gathered, but they were thin, the kind that made the light softer rather than darker. The wind picked up slightly, and the grass moved again in waves. Elias checked the lantern room early, making sure everything was ready. Before it was time to light the lantern, they sat in the kitchen with cups of tea. Elias sliced the bread the neighbor had brought, and the loaf was still warm inside. He spread butter on a slice and handed it to Mara. The butter melted at once. Mara took a bite and closed her eyes briefly, savoring the simple richness. "Bread tastes better here," she said. Elias smiled. It might, or you might notice it more. Perhaps that was true. Here, she noticed everything more. The way the kettle sounded when it began to simmer. The way the wind shifted and made the door creak gently. The way Juniper's paws made almost no sound on the wooden floor. The way Elias's hands moved with confidence around small tasks. The way the lighthouse stood outside, not demanding attention but offering it. When it was time, they went up again, and the lantern came on, and the beam swept across the sea. Mara watched it, feeling that quiet sense of something being tended properly. Elias did his checks and then stood with her, both of them looking outward. A faint drizzle began, tapping softly on the glass panes. It was not heavy, just a light rain, the kind that made the sea's surface dimple. The smell of rain, mixed with salt, came in through a small vent, clean and fresh. "It's a gentle rain," Mara said. Elias nodded. "The best kind. It makes everything feel washed." They stayed until the drizzle eased, then descended to the cottage. Elias hung their coats by the door. Mara shook a few drops from her hair, laughing softly at how quickly the weather changed here, as if the coast enjoyed variety. That evening after supper, Elias brought out a small box of candles. "The power is steady," he said, "but I like to have these ready. And sometimes it's nice to light one, just for the warmth of it." He lit a candle and set it on the table. The flame flickered gently, casting a soft glow. Mara watched it and felt her thoughts slow again. Juniper sat nearby, staring at the flame with respectful distance. Elias took out the thin notebook again, the one with the observations, and read a few lines quietly, not dramatically, just sharing. The entries described simple evenings, the smell of rain, the sound of distant music, the comfort of warm tea. Mara listened, feeling as if the words belonged to the room. When he finished, he closed the notebook and set it aside. "We can add to it," he said softly, "not to mimic whoever wrote it, but to keep noticing. Only if you'd like." Mara considered. She liked the idea. It felt like continuing a gentle tradition. "I'd like," she said. Elias stood and fetched a pen, then opened the notebook to a blank page. He placed it on the table between them. Mara leaned forward and wrote a few lines. Her handwriting was not as elegant as the old entries, but it was hers. She wrote about the drizzle tapping on the lantern glass, about the smell of warm bread, about the lighthouse beam moving steadily, about Juniper's quiet presence. She wrote simply, without embellishment, just recording what felt real. When she finished, she handed the pen to Elias. He added a line beneath hers, something about the stones drying in the sun and the neighbor's bread. And then he closed the notebook gently. It felt like sealing a small treasure. Later, Mara stood at the front door and looked out. The night was not fully dark because the clouds held the faint glow of distant town lights. But the lighthouse beam was bright, a slow-moving reassurance. The grass moved slightly in the wind, and the sea's sound came steady and low. Elias stood beside her, not crowding, just sharing the view. "Thank you," Mara said, and the words felt full even though they were small. Elias nodded. "You're part of it now," he replied. "The work, the evenings, the little discoveries." Mara felt something warm at that, something like belonging, not in a possessive way, but in a gentle way, like being welcomed into a room that always had a chair ready. When she went to the guest room again, the quilt felt familiar, the air cool and clean. She sat by the window for a while, watching the beam sweep the sea, and thought about the week ahead. The thought did not feel heavy. It felt manageable, because she carried this place with her now, the memory of steady light and warm bread and quiet routines. Downstairs, Elias moved softly, finishing his own tasks, checking doors, banking the fire. The cottage settled again. The sea continued its steady folding and unfolding. The lighthouse kept turning its patient beam across the water, and the night held everything without hurry. In the morning, when Mara eventually left, she would drive back along the coast road, and the lighthouse would shrink behind her, becoming a white line against the sky. But it would still be there, doing its work, and she would know that the logbooks would wait, the kettle would be ready, and Juniper would likely be on the window seat, watching the path with calm certainty for now. In the quiet room, the light moved across the glass, and Mara let her eyes follow it for a few more sweeps, feeling the steady rhythm of the place and the simple comfort of being somewhere that asked nothing from her except to be present.